Some good news today with Amazon and New World, and that is that the gear scaling system that they were going to introduce in 2022 is effectively being removed for a lot of people. Now it is actually still going to remain in place to some extent, but I'll talk about that as we go through the actual posts that have been made by the Amazon developer. So what they're saying here with the big change, when they start reducing the effectiveness of your gear by the scaling, some items are going to be exempt. Now they include any item that you craft. Now this is a good change because basically it was really hurting crafters themselves. People had literally spent hours to level up their crafting, they were making stuff for themselves, their guild, everybody, and then if they hadn't done the watermark system, all of their gear was effectively going to be completely pointless and neutralized. So that's no longer going to be a thing, because if you craft it yourself, well, you're not affected by the gear scaling. That's a good change. And essentially it's the same for anything that you earn from a quest, because there are those like legendary weapon quests and people are like, why did you bother giving us these in game when you're basically not going to let me use the reward at the effectiveness that it should be? I spent ages getting that weapon. So that is another good change and it makes complete sense. And then we have any item that you purchase from a faction shop. Oh, it does say the faction shop. I wonder if like the reputations for the Christmas festival and stuff like that will also apply here. But basically the idea being that if you grinded out your tokens and your reputation and stuff like that, then you should also get the rewards. Again, I think that makes also perfect sense. So those changes for me, they take a lot of the concerns away from the system, the way that they were planning on implementing it. I thought it was ridiculously unfair to crafters, and there were some outliers like those legendary quests that just didn't seem to make sense to even be in the game if you're not going to enable people to use them at the effectiveness that they should be, if that makes sense. And then they talk about some other things, which I have a milder problem with this, but it's not really a drastic problem, and that is basically when these changes are implemented, the gear score scaling will only apply to items or sold or traded or whatever you want to say after the patch. So basically if you now buy everything before the patch, now this means early 2022, not the December PTR, because this change isn't in effect in the December PTR. So you don't have to rush out this week and buy your high expensive gear, but just keep this in mind. Basically I have a problem with this because it feels like a classic Amazon thing at the minute where you reward the people who get there first and then you make it harder for the people who come after. Now they do actually address that, but yeah, like it's good because everybody who's playing now will be happy. It's bad because everybody who comes after us, well, they've got to contend with this system. And then this is where they say we acknowledge essentially there's now going to be a difference between people who have already hit level 60 and people who haven't, and that they're trying to offset that with the Gypsum. The problem with that is the Gypsum also applies to the people who've already hit level 60. I think this is basically where they're saying like, we think this is good for the overall health of the game, so we're just going to do it, and anybody who comes after it, well, you're just going to have to like basically lump it. However, they do offer a little bit of a bone, and that is basically, in addition, when we implement the gear score scaling, we will now reduce the effectiveness to the middle of your expertise and your item's gear score. So if your musket expertise is 520 and you buy a 600 gear score musket off the market, your effectiveness will be 560. So basically what it's saying is that it's going to take your expertise, it's going to take your actual gear score, and you're going to be halfway. So if you were 500 and you bought a 600 Voidbent piece, it would be effectively 550. I mean, that's better. It sort of like nerfs it a little bit, but not nerfs it completely, and that's a good change, I think. So for the gear scaling, whilst I still maybe don't love it or anything like that, I think this is a lot better. It makes sense now. It's still a nerf to crafters, because if you sell your gear, then if you're selling them to other 600 players, then they're already going to have other competing weapons and armor and stuff like that. You really were trying to sell it to the people who were like coming up and coming, who wanted to improve their gear. So there's still a few issues with it, but overall I think now this might actually just be good for the overall health of the game, and it makes sense to me. But there are some other changes with regards to the Gypsum and just overall December PTR, so let's go through those. I don't know how many of you had seen it on the December PTR, but basically the cost for creating the Gypsum orbs was like ridiculously expensive. They've completely reduced that, and that makes sense. And they've reduced it to a level where everybody will be happy enough with it, rather than just like teasing us and reducing it by like 10% or something. There was a type of Gypsum that you could just do once per week, which was basically making a potion for yourself and then going out killing monsters, but you could only do it once per week. Now you can do that every day if you want, and they've made it easy to do. And then this next one is actually like really good for the overall health of the game, but it's a shame that it's not coming in this update. And that is basically they're changing the cooldown from the Gypsum orbs from 22 hours to 18 hours. And that's basically to make it a little bit easier for you to fit it in your schedule, you know, so that if you did it at 6 o'clock one day, but you could only log in at 5 to half 5 the next day, well, actually you can still craft it because it's still within the window, although technically 22 hours would have allowed that, but you get my gist. And they address here that they want to change basically all of the timers to a daily single reset point rather than have them like 22 hours, 24 hours, etc. because otherwise you're essentially always getting later and later and later. So this makes sense. They said they're not doing that now because they want to concentrate on server merges and other critical fixes, and I think we just have to like let them crack on with that. But it's a good change in the long term. Now, essentially on this one, what they're doing is they're adding a minimum amount of expertise increase when you get your Gypsum cast, because at the minute you could literally just get unlucky and just like get a 1 increase. So they're going to introduce a minimum. This does mean that it will actually be a little bit easier to increase your expertise via these Gypsum casts. Now, what's interesting here is that per slot, I think this means is that they're aiming for about 35 Gypsum casts to get to like 500 to 600. Which I don't know if that's a lot or not, but for 35, my instinct says it sounds okay, but until I actually see it in action, I don't really know. I'm not really sure I understand this one. Basically, they're moving Gypsum rewards from cache to event. A few activities such as Outpost Rush, etc. Granted Gypsum in the cache in the PTR. That was basically causing people to hoard it, and now you can't hoard it. That sounds reasonable. I don't know if that's a problem or not, but yeah, I didn't even know anything about that. Now, overall, I think this now changes the game to a happier state. I did a positive video about the good changes, like the Great Axe nerf and stuff like that. That was in the December PTR. You can check that out if you want to check that out. And my main issue was always that this gear scaling system, I just didn't really understand why they were putting it in the game. They're sort of doing that classic thing of like announcing the extreme version of it and then toning it right down. Now, the toned down version of it, I think, well, whilst it could easily just not exist as a system, the fact that the toned down system allows crafters to craft their own stuff and not be punished for that, I think most people are going to be reasonably satisfied with this. There'll be a few of you who are probably like still angry about it and complaining because your crafting is like less valued and stuff like that. But you know, I now think that we're in a decent state. I don't think these changes will be too bad, and if you're a player already, you're not actually going to be affected by this if you buy your stuff before it goes live. I think this is really setting up for when we get the next gear score increase and everybody has to adhere to this system. Like if it gets up to like 650, for example, you can't just get somebody who's going to craft all the way to 650 and then everybody buy the 650 gear. Well, you can, but you'll only be 625 effectiveness. Overall, I'm happy with this. It's good. It was really like my main problem with the announcement a couple of days ago, and it's really nice to see that this is no longer going to be the case. If you like this video, do press like and, you know, subscribe. Please like subscribe. I need them subscribers. Have a most beautiful day. Goodbye.